Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you too, Ben.
Hello, mate. How are we?
I'm very good, mate. I'm very good. Hey, you've had an initiative that you've kicked off this week, which I think is pretty cool. Hashtag Oz Property Alive, and Oz being OZ. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the goal there is really about the industry. The property industry is so critical to the Australian way of life and prosperity and the dreams that we're trying to create. And so I was talking to a very successful broking business in Sydney on Monday, and I was having a chat with their managing director, and I said, "How's it up there?" He goes, "Well, a couple of things he did notice in Sydney. First of all, he went up to Kangaroo Ground, so down to Kangaroo Ground in the Southern Highlands. The amount of people that were out on the weekends who are all like getting exercise, and now that, so he says it was just, he'd never seen it so busy, but everyone was social distancing, but that's one of the things." I said, "What?" He goes, "I'll tell you what else I saw on Saturday. I saw people queuing up to go and have a look at properties open for inspection in the Northern Beaches area." And it just gave me this thought, because that's what our data's showing.
Yep.
And as much as the economists and everyone else are saying, well, it's going to be a bad time for property, there is an underlying demand, and our survey is showing that too, Bryce. And next week we'll release the results of our survey. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but it comes back to this initiative. So what I just thought was, now that we're coming out of these restrictions and this lockdown period, I then started doing a ring around, and I spoke to some of the presidents, all the presidents of the REI, the real estate institutes around the country. I rang Tom Panos, a great friend of the couch and an unbelievable leader in our property industry. Tom got behind it, so I'm getting all of the key people behind it. So John McGrath, if you're listening, if anyone else is out there, all the big industry people, when you're doing your opens for inspection this weekend, and everyone's definitely practicing social distancing, but I want you to take a photo, and I want you to put the hashtag on your Instas, on your Twitters, and it's just basically Oz Property Alive. And I want to show what's happening on the ground. Because that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, OZ, Ben, not AUS. OZ,
yep.
Oz Property Alive. But,
Alive, yep.
But the thing is that what you're wanting to do is to show a bit of coalface action, isn't
Correct.
it? Because I can confirm within our own team, Ben,
yes,
that I've said it now probably for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, the fact that there is competition. So again, just ramming home a point for the new people who have been listening to our podcast, not the people that have been around for 267 episodes, or whatever, we're up to 287 episodes. But the people who are just new to us, Ben, is we keep on talking about commentators making discussions about property as an asset class versus having subcategories of property all around the country. The subcategory that we're in is the investment grade subcategory.
Yep.
And the category that in for a lot of places where there's owner-occupied demand is another subcategory. So those, you will find photos, Ben, of what you're talking about in those particular subcategories where they will continue to have lines. And you will also be able to do the opposite, Ben. You will be able to find investment stock and non-owner occupied demand, or areas that have got employment that are badly affecting a particular suburb or a micro burb. Those, you will not see photos of people queuing out the side of those. So it's about being discerning.
It's about to say that the property market has reopened, and you'll be surprised how many buyers are actually out there. And so the sellers, once they know that the buyers are there, will then list their properties, and the market will get back to a level of normality, and that level of normality will instill confidence. And as we know, we talked about in all those previous episodes, Bryce, the importance of the wealth effect. So property plays a critical role, and I'll be talking to you more about that in terms of what's happening or what's making property news segment later in the show. It's really important to understand that property underpins the Australian psyche, it underpins the psychology, the economy, all of those things. So if we can get the positive message out there of what's happening in the field, we'll potentially see more sellers listing their property, and off we go. And then the property market's alive again.
Ben, Pete Wargett, who's been he's a friend of the couch. He's been on our podcast. He's got a blog. He quoted a framework which I thought was really interesting from Finalytics. And essentially, if we step back, we always say that capital growth is where demand exceeds supply, and property prices falling is largely where supply exceeds demand, right? So it's a very simple equation. Now, in that framework that he had on the blog, the supply drivers were construction and properties on the market, right? So the construction measured by new completions and approvals. Well, new completions are down, and approvals are down. So the new side is actually shrinking in supply. Then the established markets, the properties on the market, which is measured by auctions and private sales. Well, there's been a significant cut in listings, Ben. Significant cut in listings, right? So therefore, the supply on the market is limited. And then on the demand side, he said it comes down to three things: population growth, household size, and the ability to buy. So the household size is shrinking, Ben. It's not getting bigger, it's shrinking, so therefore putting more demand on properties. But the ability to buy has some subcategories, measured by interest rates, okay? Never before seen lows, Ben. Household income, well, for some people, they're affected, right? There's some people in the unemployment
definitely,
affected.
and we feel for them.
You've got job seeker, you've got subsidies, you've got underpinning there. You've got bank credit policies. Well, APRA's dropped the handbrake a little bit, so that's enabled that. And then the relative returns of property. So when you look at it through the lens of that framework, sure, the ability to buy around household income is affected, right? But because there's all that stimulus cash that's underpinning it, we must now start to get a little bit immune to someone talking about 40% drops, Ben, because it's been said on a number of occasions that haven't proven to be true.
Not going to happen, Bryce.
But sub-micro markets is what we're talking about here. So your hashtag, I think, is a very great campaign. Hashtag Oz Property Alive. So what we want to do is send out to our community. If you're out at an auction, you're out at a private, you're out at a
real estate agent and you listen to this and you've got people waiting out the front in their groups of 10 to go through, and you've got three groups of, Leanne Pilkington told me about several properties on the weekend that had over 70, so 7 groups of 10 people going through those properties in the hills districts of Sydney. You can't tell me that they're all the neighbours who are having a sticky beak, right?
No one's going to line up for that.
No one's going to line up and put themselves if they're not genuine buyers, and so it is. We've said it before, and we're very confident in saying it again. We are not going to see the corrections that are being predicted, and we'll be talking more about this in the weeks to come, where people are saying, but the one thing you guys won't talk about is when all of these repayment pauses and repayment holiday, when they end. Well, they're not going to end, but I'll be talking to you more about that in next week's show.
Ooh, like a little tease for next week.
There we go. All right, but I'm excited about today's show.
So we want people to get involved, Ben. So if you're a real estate agent, clearly you're at the coalface.
Yes.
But if you're a buyer and you're standing in a line, how about taking a photo and put hashtag #OzPropertyAlive and tag us. We'll have a look on trying to make this not about the property couch.
No,
so
it's
across
definitely,
the whole industry.
It is.
But so we can have a look. If you want to just give us a look, we'll go and have a look at that hashtag. So I think that's a good initiative, Ben. So well done.
Thank you.
Hey, just want to remind folks we're launching our course, Ben. We're doing it in a specific period of time because we want to be able to support the students that come on.
Yes.
I talked about it being the 1st of June for technical reasons. We're going to make it the 8th of June, Ben, just for a bit of behind the scenes stuff that I won't bore you with, but it'll be the 8th of June. But so just want to let people know that is coming.
Yes.
But I put a shout out, Ben, to say if anyone wants to give us a review, I might read some out. So there's a couple here. One from Kim Schultz. Amazing wealth of knowledge is the category. This podcast is an amazing tool for anyone with an interest in the property industry. It's extremely insightful and filled with plenty of personality to keep you intrigued with the content provided. I've not only bought both books, I've read them twice, Ben.
Oh, wow.
Definitely worth the time to listen from the start to get a great wealth of knowledge behind you so you have the ability to make the best decisions for your property portfolio. Thank you to the team at the Property Couch. I wanted to highlight this because she mentioned the team, Ben.
Yes.
Because there is a team. It's more than just you and
me.
At the Property Couch. So we've got Ivis and Emma as well. And I'm extremely appreciative of your passion to share this knowledge. So Ben, Kim, if you reach out to us, you've read our books twice, we're going to let you get access to the course. So we'll give you free access to that.
Wow, that's good. And was it a 4 or a 5-star or 3? What do we get?
Well, it's 5. And
I didn't want to assume anything. I never.
Well, the thing is, Ben, there's 100 reviews that are not 5 stars.
Okay.
There's 1,600 reviews that are 5 star,
Oh.
and there's 100 that are 4, 3, 2, or 1.
Okay.
And I think the twos
So
and the ones.
we've got some improvement in us.
We have the 2s and the 1s. I think is around about 40, Ben. So we've got some work to do.
We do. We'll try and please everyone.
We're okay with that. So if someone wants to give us a 2 or a 3-star review, and it grabs the attention, no problem.
Honest review. We just want honesty. That's all we want.
So there we go. And the second one is for Jared Hennequin, Ben. Great for first-time investors. I stumbled across this podcast last year and followed Bryce and Ben's recommendation to listen to every episode right from the beginning. Now, Ben, the reason I wanted to highlight this one is because I haven't shared that story for a little while.
Yeah.
But it's really critical. So anyone who's come across the Property Couch lately, it's really important that you circle back and start from the beginning, because this is a progression. This is a building upon. It's almost like a automobile university or jogging university or gym university, wherever you listen to it. We're trying to build layers so that you understand the frameworks, so that you come up to speed. So
the timeless frameworks too. They are timeless.
They are very timeless, and they've been proven to be.
Now you get those fundamentals right, you're going to go all right.
So Jared goes on to say, this podcast has provided me with a strong foundation to build a well-diversified investment portfolio. I now have no debt. Tick, Ben, that's so good.
Awesome.
10% deposit saved, and plan to buy my first property in the next 3 months. Thanks everyone at the Property Couch for your life-changing advice. Jared, you're very welcome. You reach out to us and we'll give you access to the course as well. So we're super excited about that. So folks, keep that. If anyone's interested in improving their education and self-pacing their learning, Ben, there's over 12 hours worth of teachings there with lots of really cool bonuses and lots of stuff.
Beautiful.
We'll talk about that a bit later. Stay tuned. Last one, Ben, before we kick into today's podcast. Picker survey.
Yes.
I think you've had a really good response to it.
Yeah, we've had a terrific response. So this is the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, PIPA and PICA, the Property Investors Council of Australia. So 2 peak bodies, one for property investors and the other one for the industry of professional advisors out there. What we've done is we put a survey. The average time it's taking for people to fill the survey in, 2 minutes and 37 seconds.
Oh.
So that's how quick the survey is to fill in. We've had over 1,300 responses so far, and the responses are very insightful, Bryce. It just shows you that, I'm surprised by the percentage of people who think now is an excellent time to buy property. It surprised me in terms of but that'll be announced next week's show. So it does finish, so it basically closes out on Sunday at 5 p.m. So please, this is your chance. Go into the show notes, complete that. It's closing out shortly.
So if I'm in Perth, Ben, 5 p.m. Perth time, is it?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, that'll do. That'll do.
5 p.m.
Sunday night. Get your surveys in Sunday
Midnight.
night. We're closing it out. It's 5 p.m. on the PIPA website. We'll do, if you're a member, if you've downloaded any of our stuff and you're in our community, we'll do a final reminder as well. We'll email that out. But if you're not a member of our community, then get onto the show notes, click on the link and have a go for yourself, because we're asking important questions about, is it a good time? Have you been affected by COVID from an income point of view? And then also, how have you managed in regards to tenants and landlords and impacted that side? They are the sort of 3 main themes in there. And then we're working out what state and territory you're in and what sort of income range that you're in. But again, it's anonymous, because we don't ask for any email addresses. There's no way in which we can find out who you are. You can just basically fill it in, and we've got lined up a big media release going out to all the, obviously, media outlets and so forth to share that knowledge, because it is surprising in terms of the level of noise and airwaves that have been going on for the affected, but the percentages of people who are saying they have been affected is relatively low in terms of what's going on. So that's also interesting.
But it's not too late, Ben. Get the survey done so we can get as many people.
Yes, please. Yep.
The more people, the more insights you'll have.
Get in there now and have a go.
There you go. Hey, today, Ben, we're going to talk about the top 10 tips we'd tell our 20-something-year-old selves just before we purchased our first property. And your 20-something was 23.
Yes.
And my 20-something was 24, Ben. But before we get to that, which is going to be an exciting show,
looking forward to today's show.
My Mindset Minute theme today is, he who jumps into the void owes no explanation to those who stand and watch, Ben. Jean-Luc Godard. Okay. Now, the reason I thought that was interesting is because those who questioned why we were buying at the height of the anxiety are now sort of thinking, gee whiz, there probably was a bit of an opportunity there because there was no competition. The agents were fearful, the vendors were fearful, but as the buyer went and found themselves in a very rare opportunity to buy an asset that is investment grade at no competition in a heightened fear state, and now sort of looking back going, geez, that was a pretty good decision. And then, but those who were sitting on the sidelines, Ben, are probably thinking, geez, I wish I had the opportunity to do that now that I know what I know. So
I'm a poor share trader, Bryce, but I did buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of shares at the end of March. So I don't know what I'm
Once
doing.
in a lifetime
but I just
opportunity.
thought, when others are panicked and crazy, we'll never be here forever. I did know that this was only going to be a short period, and I don't care if it's 2 or 3 years. But that's probably been the best share action I've ever done in that time. Time will tell, of course, but I jumped into the void. Even my stockbroker went,
are you serious?
"Are you serious?"
Yes.
And I went, "Absolutely." And he was like, "Wow." So even a share, and my stockbroker has been in the share market for over 25, maybe 30 years. And he was having a panicked moment, because all he was doing was basically putting in sell orders, and he gets a strange buy order from me. But I'm a shocking share investor. Make no mistake, I'm not very good at it.
All right, very good, Ben. So there we go. So the mindset minute today: he who jumps into the void owes no explanation to those who stand and watch. All right, Ben, let's kick this off. We're going to start off with your number one, Ben. If you we rewind, we put you back in the what was it? Was the flux capacitor? What was the car that Marty ran Back to the Future?
Yeah, the DCM. It was a DCM.
Orion or something?
Yeah,
anyway,
the Orion.
Let's say we jumped into that car, we went back, Ben, and we're about to have a chat with you, the 23-year-old self then.
Yep.
What was the first thing you would say to yourself now as you're about to buy that first investment?
So this is pre me being a broker. This is when I was in the tourism game, and I did the right thing, found a broker, sat down with my broker and said, look, I want to buy this property in Sydney at the time, and I had good deposit. That was the second property that I was buying, and I wanted to understand this one was going to be for investment purposes, but we were going to live in it for a little while, right? So I sat down with them and they said, oh, here's the best deal. These are all the bells and whistles and the features. It does have an offset, so it was a professional package that the particular broker was telling me about. But they didn't tell me about the benefit of actually parking money in the offset as opposed to putting it in the redraw. So fast forward several years later, and I'd made a significant dent in paying off that property, because the other property that I owned, the one in Bundoora, was kicking along nicely. I had tenants in that property as well. So I'm thinking, what a great job we've done here in terms of paying tens of thousands of dollars off on this loan. And then I come down and see my accountant in Melbourne and he goes, what are you doing? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, if this is going to be an investment property, why are you paying the debt down? And I said, well, because don't you pay debt down and then you release the equity out of it? And he goes, yeah, but an offset account allows you to keep that money to the side, and you could then just park that money on the next owner-occupied property you're going to put, and then the interest is deductible. I'm like, And
you could potentially pollute the loan too, Ben, if you didn't use it for investment purposes. So.
Correct. So structuring to have an offset, one, and we've talked about that. So this was one of the original foundations of also Money Smarts, in terms of we love what an offset is. It's it's available in Australia. Not too many other countries have it. Actually, you can count them on one hand in terms of who have adopted that type of product, because it's so damn good for the borrower, not necessarily for the lender. So that was just that. If I had my time over again, as you're saying, Bryce, I would be saying you park your money in an offset account as you're accumulating wealth. And if you're not in that big rock in the jar property, that final dream home that you're in, you want to make sure that non-deductible debt is at its lowest point possible, not necessarily having that that debt on a deductible property, and paying that down. So we've got this great property in Sydney, which is spitting off beautiful cash flow. We're paying tax on it, but if we had have structured ourselves correctly, then we could have been in a better position again. So that was a lesson learnt. So Bryce, there you go. Now, what's one for you?
The first thing I would say to my 24-year-old self back in 1999, Ben, when I bought my first investment property, is I would actually say that I needed to develop an understanding of the science behind property, not just a blanket assumption that every property doubles every 7 to 10 years, because I was very, I've documented my story around Jan Summers, Ben. She lit the spark for me. And so what I got seduced by is a concept. I got seduced by a theory. And the theory was to buy investment properties, let the tenant and the taxman pay most, if not all, of your bills, and over time they will grow in value and you can harvest that. At the time it was sell and reap the benefits. So I just got seduced by that, Ben, and I really, I grew up in Perth. I lived in suburbia, 11 kilometres south of Perth. I wasn't really involved, you know, as you grow up. My kids grow up in Melbourne, your kids grow up. There's villages. My sister always comes over to Melbourne. She goes, I just love how there's a village every 5 minutes from where you get. Like, it's just this total different world of real estate over here compared to Australia, compared to Perth. You know, some of the more affluent suburbs in the western suburbs, the Golden Triangle Bend, they had villages and all that. But we were a middle class family, so we didn't spend a lot of time there. So I just figured that, okay, you just needed to buy real estate. Like, you just needed to put your name on a title. That was it. That was the game. And then through some magic of osmosis, the textbook said, just because I've bought a property, therefore in 7 to 10 years it'll double. Like, it says it in the book, therefore it should happen in reality. And what I've obviously now over 20 plus years of doing this, I understand that not all properties are created the same, Ben. Some will perform better than others. Some will go up in value. Some will go down in value. All those things that I now know now in terms of the science behind property, I just didn't have any concept of it. My first introduction to property was off the plan. I learnt my craft through project marketers, all those sorts of things. So it was about the theory, not the science behind property. So I would say to myself, hey, Bryce, mate, pull your head in, buddy. It's not just about a theory. There's the practical application. So you need to go and dig a little deeper and understand what are the price drivers that create an excess of demand over supply so that it increases in value. Ben, that is the first thing I would say, and that's what I say to every one of our listeners. If that's you, do the same. What's the second one for you, mate?
Well, so again, if I'm in my 20s and I'm thinking about what I know now compared to what I knew then, and this is a lot, if you ask a lot of people who have completed a portfolio of properties, they will tell you, what's the biggest thing you would have done differently? They would have said, I would have gone with more properties and I would have gone earlier because I know what I know now, right? So there's a lot of confidence that gets built, and so you sort of... So the second one for me is about the one that got away. There's probably been in my 20s 2 or 3 properties that I did some really good due diligence on in locations that I thought this thing's going to go really, really well. But for whatever reason, I talked myself out of them and I didn't go there at that time. So that's probably more so around confidence and understanding what I do now. Because if I had 1 or 2 of those properties in the portfolio, I would be significantly better off in terms of that. And that comes back to also, I got advice from an accountant who said, sell the Bundoora property because we can get a better property in Sydney. That was the worst decision. That's a $500,000 plus mistake that I've made in my portfolio in terms of not keeping that asset and holding on to that property, because it would have continued to grow and would have been another little cash cow in the portfolio now. So it is about understanding that when the numbers do stack up and when you're in a position to invest, I should have. I wasn't educated enough and I got bad tax advice. I should never listen to invest in property through tax. I should have basically gone to the fundamentals, which is buy when you can afford to buy and hold for that longer term, because the assets would have stacked up beautifully because I knew what I needed to buy and I'd learned the craft of buying closer to the city because the land values in those areas appreciated better than anywhere else. So that for me was just one of those ones where I know now, and what I say to people is invest when you can afford to invest in the short and long term. You hear us talk about it all the time. And don't try and think you can be perfect at picking the market and timing, right? Oh, but it might go down a little bit more, it might go... Just remember, you're playing a long game here. Time the market based on supply and demand in the sub-markets. but don't try and think that you can pick the absolute bottom, like in the share market. It's just not possible. And if you did, it's luck. It is not necessarily expertise.
Because it's not a question of should I buy property? Is it like in any moment in time? If the question is should I buy property, I think it's not that. It's where should I buy property? Because there's always somewhere. It's just knowing exactly where that is. So time and timing.
So Bryce, what's your second tip?
All right, my next one is what I would say to myself, Ben, is I paid $199,940 for my first property, Ben.
$40, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, later I learnt that they had project marketers commission, and they were earning the $940 that's how much they were. I think it was like $12,940 that they were earning, right? So they didn't even round it up, right? So, but
so you bought your property,
and the median price in Perth at the time, Ben. So I bought a 3-bedroom apartment. That admittedly had Perth views, city views. So I've got to save myself a little bit. But on the cons, it was over 100 in investment stock, all that sort of stuff. So $199,940, which was a lot of money back then, because the median price in Perth, Ben, for a house was $158,000. $158,000. So one thing is probably should have bought a house, right? Yep. But bigger than that is I would have bought over the East Coast, bigger population centres.
Yep.
At the time, there was a lot of people going, the last person to leave Victoria turned the lights out, they were heading up to Queensland. Lots of Perth people wanted to go to Queensland. I'd like to stand here and say, I wish I had bought a house in Melbourne or Sydney, right? But I think I had that small town mentality. I think I probably would have bought in Brisbane, but if I could have said it to an hour, I would have said buy in Melbourne or buy in Sydney. But I think I would have gravitated towards going to Brisbane. Because back then everything was over 7% rental yield. It would have been cash flow positive, Ben, and it would have had a better return. So my second one was I would have become a borderless investor and bought on the East Coast first, because I have, in my experience, I started out investing in the late 90s. I started out helping people buy in the late 90s. And so what I observed is I saw plenty of people accumulate 3 properties, 4 properties, 6 properties. I know one of my friends over there has got 10 plus properties in the Perth market. And so for the last decade, Ben, it hasn't been kind to them. There was a period of time when it actually was at the beginning, in the early 2000s, but unfortunately it meant that part of the cycle, and they were 14 years older than me, Ben, so they needed the last 10 years to do some of the heavy lifting. So it would have been, I'd tell myself to become a borderless investor earlier and buy over on the East Coast. Ideally in the big ones, but I think I would have done Brisbane at the time.
Yeah, look, interesting. I mean, I bought the house across the road from Mum and Dad in the Court that I grew up in. So I was a victim of that same sort of uneducated mentality when I bought that first one. So it's very common.
Yeah, because I would have been able to buy in the 10, 15 kilometre radius, Ben. Because early days on our podcast, we always talk about the 10, 15 kilometre radius, but things have changed in Sydney and Melbourne since we kicked this off 5 years ago. So we now buy outside of the 10, 15 kilometre radius for our clients. But what I will say to our listeners is if you can afford to buy in the 10 to 15 kilometre radius in the 2 big cities, you'll get an outperform result just because of scarcity and the fact that when you have a look at the historical references to it, they generally do much better in terms of a compound growth because they're so scarce and if you get some period appeal. But quite often some people will come and say, well, in the early days you used to say you only buy in the 10 to 15 kilometre radius. Well, that's because you could buy a single fronted period home in the inner west of Melbourne, Ben, 5 years ago for under $750,000, which you can't even get close to now. So as the city becomes denser and more populated, you clearly got to make sure that you buy in an affordability, what's investment grade for the price, but also have a look. If you go further out, is there ways to get into the main employment centres? Does it still have the lifestyle? So economic activity, human interest, human behaviour, they still all apply. But back then, Ben, in the 90s, I would have been able to buy in the 10 to 15 kilometre radius. I would have been able to buy a house.
And what you're talking about there is that demand and supply story, right? And affordability story where there's lots of demand. And that's why we have pushed out into land content greater than that 10 or 15 kilometre radius. Because same with me, that one in Flemington that we bought was 2007 for $395,000 for a 2-bedder single fronter, right? So that's obviously now pushing $1 million or beyond.
Easy. Yeah.
So from that point of view, we're still trying to find those markets where the lifestyle drivers are there, the aspiration are there, the village atmosphere is there, those human interest, human behaviour stories are there. So that's what we're also trying to replicate. And also for the clients that we're working with, they all don't walk in with 1.5 to spend.
No, correct.
But if they did walk in with 1.5 to spend, we are biased towards getting that scarcity of land closer in, because you're not going to see properties in 25 kilometres from any major metropolitan and knowledge centre get to $2 million if the properties closer in aren't at 7 or 8.
Correct.
So that's also the reality. I mean, they will have a tipping point in terms of how much they can grow, and that's the ripple effect that we've talked about before. So that's also quite important.
All right, mate. So your first one was an offset account. The second one was talking about the one that got away. What's your third one?
So the third one is probably more than, we don't talk very much about the share market here because we're not experts in that thing. But what I do want to my lesson that I've learnt from this is when I do pick stocks directly myself, I'm crap at it, right? And then if I was to be severe on myself, it's because I have, back in the tech boom, I bought some shares in a media company, which was flying, got the contract to do the Sydney Olympics, the share price was going. Well, when I bought, I reckon, at the top, and then I chased my losses and I kept buying it because I tried to dollar cost average. I did all that thing right down until it went broke.
Yeah.
So
well, at least the average at the end was zero.
That's right. And I think from my point of view, the due diligence that I do in terms of buying properties versus the due diligence that I did in terms of spending 10,000 here, 20,000 there on shares wasn't reliable in those earlier days. So I've since reverted to a professional stockbroker and someone who does that work, and obviously we've got a financial planning business and we buy direct shares for our clients. So with that stockbroker and financial advisor, they do the stock picking, they do the analysis on the companies. I don't have the time to do that, so I've learnt from that to not necessarily just basically take my judgment when I haven't done the work. I now outsource to a professional in terms of doing that. So probably the same way in which people outsource to us in regards to
planning, buying.
More experience in the field. They basically do it 24/7. It's their livelihood. So how am I ever going to compete with that is basically why those people outsource to professionals, and I'm exactly the same. That broker has done the proper analysis on that company, because remember, I don't buy shares, I'm buying a company. If I'm directly, and I need to understand the business that company's in, how well it's managed, what's their debt levels, what's their strategy for growth, all of those things, and that would take an enormous amount of my time up that I don't have, so I outsource to that. But it took me a decade to work that out, because I originally, my work experience, I worked for a stockbroking company back in the days when there was chalkies, and I was running checks all around Melbourne on trams and so forth to the Reserve Bank and paying. This was before everything was automated.
It was BG.
It was before Google, before everything. It was before the internet, right? All of the transactions were done manually. Checks were being transferred everywhere. So it was a great work experience period for me, and I always thought it'd be share markets or property, but certainly wealth creation was a thing for me. But it took me a decade to work out that I'm not very good at it, so now I rely on research of others and their skill sets to basically do my share investing.
Very good. So that's how do you summarise that? You approach the share market with the same due diligence as you do the property market.
Yeah, and then realise that I need to outsource because I'm no good at it. Even if I had more time and the hundreds and hundreds of companies, no, these guys are doing that research every day. The Roger Montgomerys of this world, all of these professional people who have a theory and an approach just like we do, and they replicate that and they understand value invest. All of those things in terms of how they're investing and what they're strategy. I'm not going to know that. I'm never going to be better at them than that. So why would I even try to attempt it than to outsource to those professionals?
Very good, Ben.
Your next one, Bryce?
My next one is I would tell my 24-year-old self that we need to do some work on money beliefs. So I'd break and rebuild my money beliefs so that I can ensure some sustained success. So,
Yep, love it.
So basically, what I mean by that is we've had Julianne Cairns on our podcast. She lives over in Queenstown, Ben.
Yes.
And
Beautiful
I
part of
really
the world.
subscribe to the framework that she has built and put some work around, which is essentially that for a podcast audience, it's not easy to try and portray, but we'll give it a go. Where if you imagine a tree, it's got their roots in the ground, Ben.
Yep.
The roots are symbolic of your money beliefs.
Yep.
The soil is symbolic of the external influences you have, the people that you hang out with, Ben.
Yep.
The trunk is your internal influences, and I would quote Jamin about rewriting, some stories in my head. And then the branches and the leaves, that's the knowledge and action. And so her theory is very simply that most people just water the branches and the leaves, right? They get the knowledge and they take the action. They don't do any work on the roots of the tree, which obviously make the most difference.
Absolutely.
So I'll give you an example. Because I derailed, I had some early success in my property portfolio, Ben, and I derailed. And I'll tell you why. I moved from Perth to, initially Brisbane, but then soon after the Gold Coast when I was 27, back in 2002, Ben.
Yep.
Now that's a dangerous place for a 27-year-old to go.
Yes, the coast with the most.
The coast with the most. So basically I had I knew no one on the East Coast, Ben. I only knew business people through business relationships. I didn't have any social networks. And basically I was just over there chasing property success. And what happened is I did have some success, and this is what I bought. I bought a Harley, Ben.
Yes.
I bought a brand new BMW, Ben.
Yes.
And I rented a penthouse in Varsity Lake. So
Living
tosser.
the dream.
I was a tosser, right? Arguably still, but they're tosser toys.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, what a big wheel am I?
Yeah.
And so I was running around with no accountability. Parents and everyone were back home in Perth.
Yeah.
And here I am having a little bit of success, which I think was dangerous, to be honest, as I look back.
Yep.
But the thing is, I missed a window of time, because if you think about that period of time, there was so much opportunity. The payment that I was making on the brand new BMW would have been better parked buying another investment property, Ben. The Harley, sure, it was a bit of fun, but that was a deposit on genuinely deposits on more property.
Yes.
And I thought that it would have been fun to do some of these things as a 27-year-old unaccountable on the Gold Coast. So I would say to my 24-year-old self, let's do some work now on making sure that your money beliefs set you up for success, rather than easy come, easy go, Ben. A couple of these things that I probably needed to work on. So
I think it's important. Thank you for sharing that, Bryce. I mean, you're showing some vulnerabilities in terms of what you did there.
Yeah.
Did it bring you that happiness that you were looking for?
For 5 minutes, but not sustained.
Correct.
Right. So,
so that's good. So number one for you is develop an understanding around the science behind property. Number two for you was borderless investing, and number three for you was about building the better money beliefs.
Yep.
And that success doesn't necessarily mean material things.
My message to a lot of people is money beliefs should be something that you work on, unless you were born into a family where the normal was abundance.
Yeah.
Because if the normal, Ben, was around scarcity, I think everyone should, because we even see it ourselves, Ben.
Yeah.
We build a plan,
Yep.
someone will implement the plan, and then we see them derail and we scratch our head.
Yep.
Prior to knowing what the derailer was, you go, why didn't you just keep following the plan? Now you know that there's some stuff going on mentally, psychologically, that instead of going down the highway, you take the early exit, and then all of a sudden you're in all sorts of trouble.
No, that's true. And that's why habits and behaviours and all the stuff that we talk about, mindset, is so critical to sustain success. Got to get that out. Sustain success. There we go. So yeah, that's really important.
Okay. What about you? Number four.
Number four for me, a lot more planning. So early on, and I was probably lucky enough to work out that I did need that, because I was naturally sceptical. So I didn't get hooked up in I went to all of the seminars and all of the Spruikers talks and all that. I never signed up to anything. I was just naturally sceptical enough to sort of be careful. So I never, I haven't really bought a bad asset or done anything in that respect. Oh, don't get me wrong, I've done some, my share market stuff is pretty ordinary in the earlier days. So I'm no genius. But in terms of what I did work out, that if I planned better, and that took me right up until in my early 30s when I started to plan in terms of what I needed to do. So I had this underlying need to knowledge and insight and to make the invisible visible. And that's basically led me to, and then once I got that plan in place, well, basically unstoppable, really confident in terms of the decisions that we made. But when you're young and you're in a young relationship and you bring an asset or properties to that relationship, or and you're trying to work out whether this is your life partner and those types of things, and then you're thinking about kids and what all that means, because what we have seen and what I've seen others do is they've overcommitted and then not worked out what their goals and priorities and their big rocks in the jar are, and I've seen them having to unwind that. So I definitely could have done more planning work earlier on and set those goals up. But when you're really young, you're not quite clear on what some of those are. So it still changes. It's never going to be set in concrete. But I felt like a little bit more planning with a mentor and someone who I could say who's walked a mile and seen a mile would have put me in better stead than what I did. Like I've never been fortunate where I had to reverse out of a property. I almost bought an off-the-plan apartment in Sydney before I bought in Alexandria. I put a $1,000 deposit down, which was refundable. And then I came to my senses the next day, but I was in that environment, dots were going up on the screen, all of those types of things were happening. But I then went, what am I doing? Get back to my planning and those types of things. And now, obviously, the planning work is critical in my view in terms of you're in this business, you want to basically set up a lifetime plan, and that's obviously what I've done.
Well, entering my 23rd year of being involved in this game, Ben, my observations of those without a plan are susceptible to the breeze that blows across them, and the plan is essentially the rudder.
Yep.
And without that rudder, you're getting blown whichever direction the breeze is going. Seeing people start something, stop, next best thing.
Yep.
And I'm talking a little bit from experience here, Ben, because we are the antithesis of each other.
Yep.
Ben. Now, as we've come into our 40s, we're in alignment, but early days you were steady, you made pragmatic decisions, you didn't get carried away with the bling. I was the opposite. I was doing silly things on the Gold Coast, and because I wholeheartedly agree that the planning is something that is critical. What is the end, and work backwards to work out what it is, how you achieve that, rather than just this wandering generality that's maybe this, which I'll talk to you about shortly on my next one. But I totally agree that planning is
plan to become what you plan to become. That's where that statement which I anchored to, and then the statement which I keep reminding myself of is knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. Because you heard one of my mistakes before is I let some opportunities go because I didn't act on them, because I didn't have the confidence around that. And my money story is I came from a house where money was controlled. It controlled the household. It controlled the decision making. It controlled the level of happiness. And so I had to do a lot of work around money management, mindset, and money, and getting in control of money and feeling like. And now I don't even think about it.
What did that look like for you in terms of seeing that model and then getting into control? What was the messy middle?
Well, the messy middle is just holding firm. So, you would have moments of anxiety around not wanting to spend because that the impact of that. So that's what I did learn, that was a successful pathway. And there's a lot of people who basically go without a lot in terms of, very minimalistic living and no debt and all of that type of thing. So once I worked out, and we talked about this before, but the cash on cash return, the power of leverage and all those other elements that go together, I'm like, I don't need to wait until I'm 70 to see the fruits of my labour, even though delayed gratification is important. I also wanted to also make sure that I could do this sensibly as long as I could be in control of money, and then hence money smarts and developing a money system and all of those types of things through working with Michael Pope and those types of people. So these aren't all just things that I've just thought of. They're a combination of research, insight, putting theories into practice, learning, experiments, and meeting amazing people like yourself and like Michael Pope and and bringing all that together and building a framework that I just follow. And it's just a process now, not an event, and we just work through that process and we follow the plan. Yeah,
it's interesting because one of the things that, as you said that, I was thinking around connecting a couple of extra dots in my head, but we probably identify as a battler family, right? My dad worked 6 days a week, but not only that, some of the early messages I got was, I saved up for a pair of Jordans. They were Jordan 4s. They cost $204, Ben, which is still expensive today, but back then, that was an investment, Ben. But I remember
if you kept them.
I remember my dad said, you have to get them bigger because you need to grow into them. And I remember also I wanted to get the Adidas Roams, but I ended up only getting the Adidas Campus, right? And that because they were the shoes at the time. But I had to get them too big. So I'm flopping around like a clown in these shoes. And by the time I actually fit them, they worn out. I was on to the next one. We never wore we always kept our best dress for Sundays, but Sunday never came right. So I think that created a belief in me that when I did get this success, I thought I need to bust out of this.
Correct.
I just need to spend and don't save. And so it's interesting that I've circled back, and some of those. My dad was born in 1939, shadows of the Depression, all those sorts of things, and so austerity was big for him. But it was interesting to see how I burst out of that was to spend and say, look, I've made it, and all those sorts of things, and had done it a little bit early. So interesting that you say that, but planning is a good thing, Ben. My fourth one is I would remind myself that successful because I wanted to be a passive property investor.
Yep.
At times, I wanted to be active, and that's fine. But I would remind myself that successful passive property investing should be boring. And what I mean by that is if you want excitement, go bungee jumping.
Yeah.
Because really, buy an investment property, settle on it, get a tenant, 10 hours a year to manage it. Like it's not going to give you the thrills. But what I observed in my own self is I wanted the adrenaline, I wanted the fun, I wanted to make things happen all the time.
Yep.
So I've talked about this before, so I won't go into too much depth. But we did a property development on the Gold Coast. It was 2 houses side by side. We wanted to turn it into 21 apartments. I remember Chappelle Corby's dad lived next door, and there was a development on one side of him. We were about to buy the 2 houses. We were trying to negotiate with him. It was interesting, our approach at the time, thinking, if you need money for legal fees, we're happy to buy your house. I mean, talk about...
aggressive.
Aggressive, right? But he didn't sell to us, so he would have had 2 unit developments either side. And then we went through the process, 18 months of doing the development, and then we bought it on option, Ben, and we couldn't get the finance to work because the Gold Coast City Council changed their town plan at the time. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes around that, but we were chasing the adrenaline. And clearly, if you pull off property development, there's some good money into it.
There is, absolutely.
The profit was looking pretty good. So there was that. Down in Coffs Harbour, there was a street that we'd built 5 houses in, Ben, 2 on one side, 3 on the high side. So we're going through that sort of spec building phase. And then when I did the sums, I didn't make that much money when I sold it, Ben, because you've got to give too much away to the government, you've got to give too much away to the selling agent, and it cost me a fair bit of money getting in, and we had 5 of these things all going at once. And then there wasn't any scarcity involved. So in reflection, again, it's like, well, you were getting absorbed by all these other things, right?
Yeah.
And sure, if I'm sitting on a stage, Ben, and I'm sitting there on a rocking chair and I rock all day, pretty much I'm doing something all day, right? Yeah. But if you measure where I've gone, Ben, the rocking chair hasn't gone anywhere. It has not moved forward one iota.
No.
And essentially, there was a bit of that going on. So I'd remind myself that successful passive property investing should be boring, and I should go and do some bungee jumping if you want.
Well, I think you make a really good point there, Bryce. I mean, I've always, as much as property became my passion and my weekends were filled with hundreds of inspections and auctions and all of that, and the accumulation of knowledge that I built over time, because I just wanted to be a subject matter expert in this particular area that I was doing, because I was conservative by nature. So I needed that confidence to basically turn the wheel in terms of that. But when I turn the wheel, then I'm like, well, that's it. I'm not here to renovate and profit. So one of the big things for those people when you are looking to become an investor and you're thinking about that is, are you going to be a really active investor, hands-on, reviewing your portfolio every 3 months and you're looking at ways in which you can add value, or are you just going to be a passive investor where it's exactly that. It's basically I've got my life over here. I know I've got a property manager looking after the property. I'm just going to let time do its thing, and I'm going to keep my tenants happy in terms of making sure that the property's in good lettable order. But really, I just want to get on with my life. And you'll work out which camp you want to be in, because there's no doubt that you can make money out of renovating, you can make money out of commercial, you can make money out of all different strategies, subdivision and all that type of stuff. And you can really accelerate that. But once I had my plan and I'm like, okay, I just need four really good properties. Okay, well, I've just got to work my way to allow when the income's in and when the equity's there and I've got enough, I can execute. And then I go forward with that. So I think it's a really, really good point. My final point, of my top 5 tips of what I would tell myself in my 20-something years so I wouldn't make the mistakes that I made during that time, is the greatest returns, Bryce. The very, very greatest returns and rewards come from delayed returns. So that is basically saying that, and I am proof of that in terms of delayed gratification. But as our good mate James Clear will tell us, calling him a mate now, I met him once, but he's got a global best-selling book.
New York Times best-selling James Clear.
It is a ripper. And he says the greatest returns are the delayed returns. The things that you put effort into and then you just let them grow. And I think that comes down to the degrees that we embark on over a 3-year period, the sports programs that we embark on to win premierships, that instant gratification, those instant highlights, those instant sugar hits that people are after. If you keep chasing those, and that's addiction and drugs, and then you will not find your way home. You will not understand that those things are, come over time. So, every now and then you still got to pinch yourself and being how fortunate I am. I won the lottery in terms of being born in this country. Australia is an amazing place to live, incredibly safe, fairly reasonable governance. Reasonable, just on some days.
Little stomach punch there.
I mean, that's the politics. If there was no politics, we'd be even better than we are, but that's the politics.
At least it's democracy.
But coming back to the point is that over time, that 5-year, that 10-year, that 15-year, that 20-year, now coming up to 25 years of doing this, I can look back on the portfolio I've built and I can say to myself, the financial freedom, that I've got, that hasn't really required great risk, just solid execution, staying the course, that I am being rewarded for that effectively the seeds that I planted when the first property I bought at 23, the next property at 27, the next property at 31, etc., etc., etc. And I am testimony of that. And now I'm able to pay it forward through this podcast, through working with you, sharing with our community, that we are both evidence of the fact that even if you can be a bit rudderless as your exam, but your course is really clearly defined for you. Your roadmap's very clearly defined for you. It's very clearly defined for me, and we are now teaching others that they don't have to have that same challenge.
Yeah, I want to give hope to the folks who have made a few mistakes along the way, because I am the one that's made mistakes along the way, but I've course corrected. And it's very clear what what it looks like for me.
So Bryce, your number one, your final top 5?
Well, I don't think this will be a surprise based on a couple of those stories I've told, but there's more to life than money, Ben. I gypsied around a lot. A lot. We talked about it in the podcast, I think it was 2 weeks ago, how many places both of us have lived in. So you've been a gypsy as well, but it does come at a cost of chasing money at the expense of other things. My dear old grandmother, she was 92. She passed away during this pandemic, Ben.
Yes.
So it was 18 years that I didn't get to spend with her. My cousins growing up. So there's some of those things that money just can't define or buy or all those sorts of things. So I don't have any regrets moving to the East Coast. I really love being over here. I met my wife over here. And for what we do, I think there's more opportunity over here. But there is more. I'd say there's more to life than money, and make decisions based on happiness rather than money. And I guess probably the only upside, Ben, of all the gypsying that comes around. I imagine if we got my wife on here, she'd share a few war stories about what it's like chasing my ambition around for the last 15 years with me. But I guess probably I got television opportunities largely because of the fact that I was so well travelled. And saw so many markets around this country. So,
well, there is a lived experience in what you've done, right? And you now have the ability and the legacy to pass on that knowledge in terms of, people often reach out to us through our channels and, ask for a little tip here or a tip there in terms of what it is. And we're very happy to share that, right? And we've obviously got this community that we can share that through and all of the things that we're doing. So I think your story is one of, don't not follow your dreams, but also don't, understand the motivations of why you're following those dreams is a really very powerful point.
My number one tip, Ben, is don't do any major life events in your first year of marriage. I moved.
Don't have a kid. Don't make it. Keep going.
Well, I got married in Fiji, came home 4 days later. We drove from Melbourne to Brisbane for me to start a new gig.
Yeah.
So first year marriage, me starting a new gig in Brisbane. My wife not knowing many people, because we'd lived in the Gold Coast before, she didn't know many people in Brisbane. So there's just all these major undertakings in that first year of marriage. So if any of you are listening out there,
how's this going for you, darling?
You're about to get married. Can I just say, don't do anything. Well, in my experience, don't do major things. Oh, how you going over there? Everything drop? Don't do anything major.
Plan to become.
Just enjoy your relationship. Just enjoy your relationship with those first 12 months. So
there we go. So there's the top 5 things we would tell each other. In our 20s, effectively. That's sort of what we were trying to do with today's show.
So there you go. Hopefully that might help a few of you folks. Thought it was a light-hearted way to say, well, here's some mistakes we've made, or here's some pivoted observations, or here's some course corrections we would have done had we done it. And you might be able to relate to 1, 2, or in some cases you might be able to relate to all 10. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is as you know, I cook breakfast for the kids most mornings. And my goal is just to get as much food as I can into their bodies that's not sugar.
Yes.
And so what I do, Ben, is I make scrambled eggs and I put them on the toast. But what I do is I cut the... I've got this down to a fine art, Ben. It takes me about 8 minutes, right? But I cut the crusts off the toast. I put the scrambled egg on the toast, and then I cut it into 6 squares, Ben. And then I dish it up to them onto their plate. 6 little hors d'oeuvres, Ben, little snacks. But what they do is they come up and they pick them up like little snacks. Yeah. And before I know it, they've knocked it down, the eggs and the toast down the hatch, and without sort of...
touching the sides?
Sam in particular, my youngest, is like, Dad, can we rinse and repeat on that? So my point is that's my little life hack on how I get the kids to eat low release energy food.
Yes.
So that 30 minutes later they're not hungry
or screaming or got it.
So
if Sammy comes back for a second, you just offer him the crust.
No, mate. Well, the thing is with him, I'd rather because he's a constant. Dad, I'm hungry. Dad, I'm hungry. Dad, I'm hungry. And this is where it came from, Ben, because I'm like, you are going to drive me insane. So I've got to work out how can I fill in as much as I can. And so there you go, folks.
Just the crust is just something that they've not liked, or they just avoided when you used to serve up sandwiches?
I don't know if you've observed your kids when they eat sandwiches, Ben, but when the crust is on there, they give it this really wide berth. And so they're definitely not going to eat the crust, but they leave a lot of good food behind as well. So what I've thought is, I'm not pampering them. I just am going into the space. I just want to fill them as much as I can with as much food as I can. That's low release energy.
A friend of mine told me a great story when he was a kid that one night he didn't eat his dinner. So his mum just put it in the fridge and basically served it to him for breakfast. And if he didn't eat it, and he says, and so he's a great mate of mine, Clinton, and he says, at that moment in time, I knew that I needed to eat everything that I was served up, or I'd going to see it again, and I'd see it again, and I'd see it again. Yeah. And of course,
those are the days, Ben.
In parenting these days, you'd have docs around coming to say, "What are you doing? You can't do that."
The child's got to starve. It's like, no, it's one meal.
So anyway, so I'm not advising for people to do that. Please don't take that as advice.
No.
But it made a point.
You're not suggesting to
inject disinfectant, and I'm not suggesting that you don't need to cut the crust off your bread or anything. No, whatever works for you
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. And that's the important point. But I've raised that story with Jane a couple of times when the boys are not necessarily eating the good stuff. But I too am a little bit fussy on my food. I don't eat tomato, as you know.
Yeah.
Raw tomato dominates, so I don't eat it. But so
Tomato,
I can't,
vegetable, or fruit,
I can't
yeah?
be sitting there saying, kids, eat everything on your plate when I move the tomato to the side.
Wow.
So there
Is
you go.
tomato a fruit or veggie, Ben?
It's got seeds, Bryce, so it is a fruit.
Oh, I'm impressed.
Yes, so if it
Not
didn't
bad
have
for a steak and
seeds,
chips fella.
yes. So
Yeah, it doesn't
it's a
need
bit
it.
like pumpkin.
All right, very good.
Anyway,
Hey,
so
what's making
pumpkin?
property news, mate?
What's making property news, Bryce? A couple of important messages here. Firstly, I'll start with just the property market seems to be passing each test every weekend. Clearance rates are up, yes, on low numbers, we understand that. But obviously, Nerida Conisbee came out and said the evidence is suggesting, and she's been speaking with some agents, so she's a property economist at realestate.com.au, and we get her on the show and you'd be saying, well, she's got a bias towards this. So, yeah, but she's also a subject matter expert in the knowledge, and she's got the best data going around. So when she talks,
You listen.
I listen.
Yeah.
And then when the journalists then did some ringing around and asking a few of the agents, they're adjusting their price guides up in some pockets of Sydney at the moment. So that's a positive sign. So that's definitely making news. The other big one that I wanted to focus on, because conscious of time, is what's been released by the Property Council of Australia. This is big news. So they have a 7-point plan.
Yep.
In terms of kick-starting the Australian economy,
come on.
and also understanding a few very, very important things. And that is, Bryce, that the property industry, put this into context, is 13% of GDP, employs over 2 million people. So in terms of, I think it's mining and manufacturing combined, it's bigger than those from an employer's point of view. And so it's a critical element of our marketplace. So they've got a few 7-point plan. We'll put the link in the show notes where you can get the full document, but I'm going to highlight just a couple of those 7 points because we don't have time for everything. Because there's one in here which in my view is the ACE card that the Liberal Party could use that basically beats any other sort of initiative that they need to do. So I want to get to that quickly. But the first one is a $50,000 new home boost scheme. So anyone who wants to buy or sign up to get a new home built, which obviously construction jobs and everything like that, they'll basically, so 50,000 new dwellings would be what they're looking to do as this new home boost scheme that they were looking at. They're looking for tax reform on stamp duty, aren't we all, in some degree? And I agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with the land tax, but because GST is state-based revenue, I absolutely support looking at GST. We've got to grow up. We've got to understand where we can pay for things. It is a consumption tax. It's the best type of tax. Stamp duty is not a productive tax at all. It's an ineffective tax. In fact, the amount of money that we get from it is arbitrary. It's inconsistent. So from a planning point of view, if your property market's going up, then your stamp duty revenues go up, your property market's going. It's just not easy in terms of state governments to plan. So come after GST, and this is the politics piece. I don't understand why we can't have a genuine conversation with mature people that GST needs to lift up. In terms of, it's a great opportunity to look at sort of doing some initiatives around social housing to get some more of that social housing so we have a good social housing safety net. So I think there's a little bit there. But here it is, Bryce.
Oh.
The big one that I've been advocating for, and it's a simple fix, and it's something that we're very familiar with. Robert Menzies, Bryce. Sir Robert Menzies.
Oh, you changed tone.
The founder of the Liberal Party. He had 2 stints as Prime Minister. One when he was, I think it was the National Union Party, just don't quote me on that, but he had a small stint before World War II as the Prime Minister, when one of the other Prime Ministers resigned or passed away. I can't quite remember that backstory. But his major piece, right?
Oh, what was it?
He is the founding father of the Liberal Party.
He is.
And I'm not a member of the Liberal Party. As I said, I've voted Labor more than I've voted Liberal in my life, so just context people.
That right in.
So he took over in 1949, post-war, post-Second World War, and he effectively governed our country to the most prosperous period of time. Okay. The great Australian dream was built on that. Oh, wow. And it was built on the back of what, Bryce? Oh. Not on the sheep's back, because that got us there. Not on the back of gold in terms of how we got through society. But on the back of what, Bryce?
Oh, I like the tone.
On the back of what?
The immigration bit.
Immigration, Bryce. Immigration. All of us here today are a product of immigration other than our First Nations people. And so immigration led that boom. And we are, if we're talking about the worst economic climate since that period, then we need to look at immigration. So take the politics out of it. Jobs for Australians, that is jobs on merit. People, put your best foot forward, get the job that you want, work hard, get that job. So if you do immigration, Bryce, and so the Property Council of Australia are talking about a Welcome to Australia immigration plan. I love it.
Yeah.
I think it makes perfect sense to me. Let's get the best and brightest from overseas who bring their money with them, all right? So they actually have to have money, so they're not going to be a burden on our taxes. And Bryce, the day that they arrive, they walk off the plane and what's happening? There's people in duty free who have got a job because they're going to buy a little bit of duty free when they get there. They walk through customs. Oh, there's a customs and an immigration officer. There's a person walking a dog. That's a job. They get out of immigration. The trolley that they use, they park the trolley. Oh, the bloke has to go and pick up that trolley. That's a job. So there's a job for that trolley guy. They get in a Uber or a cab or whatever. They go into the city and they stay in a hotel room. That's a job for the front office desk person, for the concierge person to take the bags up to. There's a job in the restaurant for someone to serve them their first meal in Australia. Wait a minute, there's a chef. The chef's got a job to do. He gets that job. Now, they've only just arrived in Australia. They've got to transfer their money into the country. Well, that's nice, a big wad of cash.
Yep.
That's basically, there's been no productivity on that, just money coming in. Oh, now that night, they also need to go out and get to 7-Eleven to get some supplies. So they've got the convenience store that they need to go to. Oh, that's a job for someone in the convenience store. What about the truck driver who drove all the goods that got them? So understand where I'm going with this?
Wow.
Every person that comes into the country, every dollar that's spent on property is $3 into the economy. Every person that comes into this fine nation could be our next brilliant brain surgeon, could be the next person who cures cancer, could be the next person who also turns up and cleans a building and lives an honest life and lives a better life from where they've came from. So
aspirational. They want home ownership. So Ben, let's pressure test this from the other side then. Okay. So clearly, I agree. What about the fact that they will be taking, just for a discussion point here,
yeah, sure.
They'll be taking local jobs.
How would they be taking local jobs? They've just created more jobs than they've taken, Bryce.
Hey, I know the answer. I'm just stimulating the discussion here.
That's the point. So as long as we get that message out there to people, because what happens then, Bryce, is they're like, then they go on the portals and they need to look for maybe short-term accommodation outside of a hotel. And then after that, they spend usually 6 months, then they go shopping for a home. And this is what the Property Council is saying in terms of the biggest way that we can get through this is to continue our immigration program. Now, we have learnt through COVID-19 that our program of isolating people for 14 days, so we can test them on the plane on the way out, we can test them when they arrive, we can isolate them for 14 days, we can test them after, then they're bringing no risk to us in terms of that. They're just bringing opportunity, and then they go shopping, Bryce. They need to buy linen, they need to buy a bed, they need to buy a couch, a fridge. All of those things are retail jobs. All of that is part of this movement that will get us through this period and make Australia the prosperous nation, or keep Australia the prosperous nation that it is. And that's what Bernard Salt has been talking about. That's what we believe, and that's what is going to happen in terms of they're coming anyway. So why would you stall them? I would bring them now because they create more jobs than they take, and that is evidenced in all of the economic data. Because we're not necessarily taking people who are unwell, who can't be productive to the society. We can work out who we want to take, and remembering we've got a baby boom generation where 5,000 people a week are turning over 65 years of age. They are going to need healthcare. They are going to need support services. They are going to need all of these other things. But what the country needs is a tax base, and that is people working to be able to pay for the medical and all of the things that we offer these people. So it is absolutely critical that we bring young people to this nation. The $5 POMs, the Italians, the Greek, the Vietnamese, all of these people that we've brought through over the journey, the 40s and 50s and 60s, is why this country is great, and why this country is multicultural, and why, on the whole, we've got a great society. So immigration is the key to unlocking the economic door, and as long as everyone understands that, we're going to be better served.
Mate, I like the tone change, I like the passion, and clearly I agree with you. So there you go, folks. Let us know what you think on socials. But I think there's some good insights. Mate, I like this segment that you've kicked off here.
You do?
What's making property news?
I've got some good data for next week. We're going to obviously have a show on all of the data that's coming out. So it's a little bit of a deep dive into the data and the results from the survey. So I'm looking forward to sharing that insights next week.
Very good, Ben. So there you go, folks. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. Looking back to our 20s, Ben.
Yes.
And have a little insight into how we would pivot and how we would change. But until next week, Ben.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next week, folks. Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.